Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I am your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Maybe you've been listening for a while, or this is your first episode. If you like what you hear, would you do us a favor by rating and reviewing us on iTunes? This is a fantastic way to tell us you enjoy what we are creating. Also, if you want more MTSS resources, sign up for our weekly newsletter using the link in our show notes, and check out our website for all the blogs and guides you would ever need about MTSS. When I taught middle school, we conducted an annual survey asking students a simple but crucial question. Did they have a trusted adult in their life, someone they could turn to if they were in trouble? Their answers often pointed to teachers, school staff, parents, or grandparents. This process helped us identify students who might feel isolated without anyone to lean on in times of need. And this practice, known as relationship mapping, is a powerful tool for understanding and supporting students. In our discussion today, we're going to explore this topic further with Jackie Riley, a school psychologist and an executive function coach that is on our Branching Minds team serving our customers. So welcome, Jackie.
Thanks, Larissa. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, Jackie, tell us a little bit about your background to kind of prime our conversation.
Sure. So I am a school psychologist by trade. So I've worked in public schools, private schools, supported early intervention and preschool students all the way up through college and university. So um, supporting learners is at the heart of what I do. Currently with Branching Minds, I support our partners, right? So I help them kind of achieve all of their goals utilizing our software and strengthening their current MTSS practices.
Well, we're glad to have you on the team, Jackie. And thank you for bringing your experience here today to chat about this topic. So maybe I'm going to have you kind of define for us and explain what relationship mapping is and why it might be considered a powerful tool for fostering positive connections between students and educators.
Sure. So, relationship mapping, honestly, I think is more than just a tool. It's really a strategic approach. And we're going to ensure that every student has a solid relationship with an adult at school. Research is continually confirming the power of relationships as fuel for positive academic success, behavioral success, positive attendance. They're really, strong relationships are such a protective factor for our students. And relationships between students and teachers are really directly and strongly, they predict motivation, school climate, especially at those secondary levels, right? So middle and high school. We see strong relationships between GPA and relationships. It really improves motivation. It's amazing, right? What relationships can do. So at its core, relationship mapping is just that. We're going to map out the relationships in a building. It can be done in a variety of ways, but really the goal is just to visualize all of the students in a building and determine which students have or don't have a strong relationship to an adult in that school. From there, our staff and personnel can begin to foster positive relationships and connections. So, students without those positive connections with school adults will want to pair them with a supportive adult mentor within the building throughout the year. Support not only the students, but have all of the mentors supporting each other, reflecting on those successes, challenges, and just monitoring progress with their admin to determine how well those processes are going.
Yeah.
Ideally, then at the end of the year, right, you're all going to convene, talk about how your efforts went, determine which students were positively affected. You may want to, I don't know, pay particular attention to at-risk students, as those connections may be more critical for students who are having a hard time at home or at school. But really just in essence, map out everyone, ensure all students have someone, and then continually monitor how those relationships are going over the year.
Yeah, I think that the like important key of this is that it's just strategically approaching that every student has someone that they can connect to.
Yeah.
Because I think as an educator, administrators will be like, build relationships with your students, you know, make sure make connections, all those kind of things. And I think sometimes it's very cliche, right? If you have classroom management problem, build relationship. If that student's acting out, build relation. And so teachers can kind of be like, oh my gosh, like don't tell me to build relationships.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's different if it's a building wide approach, right? I
Yes.
remember on one of our early episodes of the podcast, one administrator talked about how they did a measurement of student belonging, right? And that's kind
Mm.
of in relation to, relationships and connectedness.
Yeah.
And they found that there was one school that they had like a high number of students that didn't feel connected. And so
Oh,
that school made a concerted effort to build relationships with those students. And then by the end of the year, it whittled its way down to only one student. And
right.
that is a profound effect on those students, like, as they kind of move throughout their educational experience. And so I think sometimes we can think, oh, it's just on the teachers to build relationships, but I think that it's about a building environment and culture. And so
Yeah.
when you're strategic about it, then it becomes more part of the norm of what you do.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. So kind of expanding it beyond teachers, it's all school staff. It's any
Yeah.
trusted adult in a building we want for a student. So it doesn't necessarily have to be their classroom teacher, and it isn't always going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and because I do think that there's some teachers that are really, really great at that. They can just connect with any student, right? And then there's other teachers that sometimes it's a personality match, right? There's
Yeah,
just some teachers who are like,
absolutely.
or even subject matter. I had students in my English class that they just really didn't love English. And so they had a harder time connecting with me, even as I
Oh.
mean, as much as I try, right, to like get them to love English, but
Yeah.
they really loved their PE teacher, and it was because they love sports, and that's what they connected. They had that thing in common with their teacher. So, I think
Mhm.
there's, like, lots of areas that we can kind of dive into, but, I would love for you if do you have any kind of, like, real specific examples of how this plays out or maybe even success stories you've seen in your work?
Yeah, I can kind of speak to exactly what you were saying. I'm picturing a fourth grade student that I worked with. I was in a K-12 building, so a lot of the students in elementary school had FaceTime, and they saw middle school teachers in the hallway. They saw high school teachers in the hallway. And this kiddo he was demonstrating a lot of behaviors. He was giving his classroom teacher a run for his money. And at the end of the day, we did an FBA to, assess what the function of that behavior was. It was ultimately attention seeking. So we found a way to ultimately provide that kiddo with the attention that he was seeking at an appropriate time. And it was with one of the big kid teachers that he so lovingly called them. We had this little fourth grader who really was enamored with a high school teacher just through interactions in the hallway, right? This teacher had a great vibe. They also both were big WWE fans. So, really, kind of a nod to the interest that you were referring to. But we kind of built that relationship into the student's behavior intervention plan, right? So, we had like a wrestling belt, and we included that trusted, beloved adult who wouldn't otherwise have been, in the student's daily life into that behavior plan. So we really use those relationships. And it wasn't one that you might necessarily think of on paper, right? It's a high school teacher and a fourth grader, but it just worked. So I've seen it in those younger grades. Another one that comes to mind in middle school was I had a student on my caseload. He was on the autism spectrum. So he struggled with a lot of relationships, both with peers and adults, and we were getting him ready for that transition to high school. So he was leaving the middle school where he had a couple, a couple pals, a couple trusted adults, but entering this much larger building with a whole bunch of students that had kind of fed into this public school. And he was very particular about a lot of things. And ultimately, we set up and helped in advance kind of foster some relationships with high school adults. And the one that really stuck were the cafeteria workers. So this student met with the cafeteria workers. He helped lay out a menu with some of the things that he wanted to be included. So it was a really, really fun way to just engage, perhaps not necessarily the staff that might be included in these types of things. So it
Yeah.
was
Oh,
really, really great. It was, and
I
he had
love
a great menu, great
I
burgers.
love that. Well, because it's, I feel like we talked, I remember talking with lots of different staff, whether it's be para educators or our cafeteria staff or, our librarian. I think that every person that interacts with students has an opportunity to have relationships. And so it's just, and most people who want to work in a middle school know that they're going to have to interact with kids
Yeah.
in some way. So they kind of they don't mind kids, right?
Yeah.
And so it's fun because, I always think sometimes the students I even didn't have in class, but maybe I had in like theater club, I had a different kind of relationship with them because
Yes.
I didn't have to assign them homework, right? So it was an opportunity to build those kind of different relationships. And I just love that it's the cafeteria workers, like,
Yeah.
it's great. It's
Yeah.
great.
And one
Yeah.
that I personally had worked with was a 12th grader at the high school. So he wasn't in my class, but he was on my caseload. He was on my counseling caseload. And he was having a really, really, really tough time, just kind of hood up, head down, work wasn't getting completed. Teachers were at their wits' end. And so we set up kind of again, like a modified check in, check out type of thing where I couldn't see him all the time. We couldn't meet daily, right? I had other students on my caseload, but he had early dismissal. So we just kind of worked it out that he came down at the end of each day. He could work at the table outside my office if he wanted to. We would chat as often as we could, but with the understanding, right? He was, 18, 19. He was very aware of what the parameters might be. And it was slow. It was slow going, which I think is really important to keep in mind with this kind of thing. It's not going to be, oh, we do the relationship map and I'm going to be that kid's person and it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
So it took time, but I think my most my one of my most proud moments as a school psychologist was his English teacher coming down at the end of the year on the last day of school, and she was like, what did you do? He's a different person. This is not the same kid who was here in September. So what we noticed was a change in his demeanor. It was a change in his attitude, his willingness to be cooperative and complete work. It was a complete 180, and it took time, but all it took was time with an adult on a semi-regular basis. So
Yeah.
really, really powerful stuff.
Well, I think you bring up a good point that the time that it takes to build those relationships
Sure.
is, I think, in so many ways, there's lots of urgent things, right, that need to happen on a daily basis in a school, right? And I think, as a teacher, I'd feel this pressure from the beginning of the year. It's like build relationships, but I think that it, you have to allow the time just to happen and allow daily experiences with students, small conversations.
Yeah.
Those small conversations build up. I think there's that strategy of, I think it's like 2 by 10 or something, like spend 2 minutes with
Yeah.
one student every day, work in a pattern. And just that idea of just those small conversations can build up. And oftentimes those are the things that kids remember, right? Oh,
Yes.
you asked me how my day was every day. You
Yeah.
took interest in something. And it could be really small. Honestly, there's times when I think about, I'd have students be like, you told me this. I don't even remember saying and some of it's because it's like
Yeah.
I'm having lots of these different conversations in a day. But
Yeah.
like that work, it's you're planting seeds. And I, as a middle school teacher, I had to always remember I have to plant seeds because they may remember those conversations later on
Yes.
down the road.
I love that. Planting
Yeah.
seeds.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about just a little bit about what that my initial process for schools or educators do that. And I know we've talked about this like on smaller scales, but what do you see as sort of the initial process for relationship mapping for schools to do this work?
Sure. It doesn't need to be complicated, right? I bet a lot of our listeners are doing this currently in their buildings, in their schools, without knowing that it's called relationship mapping, right? Just a fancy name for something we might already be doing. But what we're looking to do is have a list of all the students in a building. We want all the staff members in that building to indicate. It can be with a sticker, it can be, a star, it can be anything on that hard copy list of names. If you have a relationship with that student, if you would identify that student as someone who trusts you. So that's really all it's going to take. So doesn't need to be complicated. It can start, on a smaller scale, right? If you're not doing this at all, it might be your team of school psychologists or social workers, whoever's, conducting reeval testing, and start there. See who has a relationship with which student that's up for their reeval, and start there. Build those relationships. It could be at a class level if you want to start there, and just kind of determining perhaps the extent of a teacher's personal relationship with everyone in the class. That might range from, a student they interact with minimally to perhaps, those students who really openly share their
Yeah.
feelings and thoughts.
Yeah, because I think that's the other level of it, right? Like identifying what type of relationship, right? Like, are they telling you, are they treating you like the trusted adult? Are they just, barely interacting? Like kind of really mapping what your type of relationships with your students are. I think that's a whole other level to it. But it is, you have to start somewhere, right? You have to really be like, okay, who do I have a relationship with? And that's sometimes hard when I really think, because I remember there was a time when our administrator really wanted us to go through our class list and something like write one positive thing about the student or one positive interaction you've had with
Yeah.
them. And it really helped us evaluate, like, who are we really interacting with on a daily basis in a positive way? And like, are there students that I'm not? And what can I do to do that? It really forced us to really look at, oh, I really haven't had a conversation with this student. They kind of just, fly in under the radar and don't say much or things
Yeah.
like that. And so there's different, I think, ways that you can kind of go about that.
Yeah. Another thing I've seen done is when again, kind of at the building level, you have every student's name written down, the staff are indicating who they have positive relationships with, but you can also have them indicate if they have concerns about a student. So someone, that a teacher or staff member believes to be at risk academically, emotionally, behaviorally. And it may be, the teachers might indicate that they have positive relationships and concerns. So it's just a really great way to kind of get a visual on that and a
Yeah.
pulse on who has positive relationships and who might be lacking.
So what are maybe some challenges that we see with kind of implementing this? I mean, I feel like I can already think of like what might people object to this or have as challenges. But what about, so what would you say?
Yeah, I think in general it's going to be a win, right? You're not going to see a lot of pushback from educators when you're telling them to be a light in a student's life. But at the end of the day, we have limited resources, and time is certainly a resource. So we may need to kind of adapt schedules at a building level, make room for check-in, check-out type procedures, make room for morning meetings, and kind of reevaluate classroom expectations, work to kind of embed relationships in our instructional practices, and honestly, PD and resources on relationship building for those staff who are working with maybe a tougher student, providing them some PD or resources on how to best connect with that kind of student. I'm
Yeah.
thinking at that elementary level, they're generally with one teacher, right, for most of the day. So, in theory, that could be super helpful and foster really deep, impactful relationships. But that could also backfire if they're really only with one adult for
Mhm.
most of the day. So, really utilizing those special content area teachers at the elementary school level.
Yeah.
At the high school, I mean, it might be the opposite problem, right? You may only see a student for 40 or 50 minutes a day, depending on how scheduling works, or maybe not even daily.
Mhm.
But on the flip side, given where our secondary students are in their development, what things are important to them, it might be easier to kind of form those relationships based on kind of the personal connections that you talked about earlier with your
Yeah.
drama students. So kind of pros and cons to both. But at the end of the day, we really want to ensure that our our staff and our teachers have the resources to really build those relationships and the time to
Yeah.
do so.
Well, and I think at the secondary level too, I can I mean, I could probably, like, channel all of the different things that were said. Anytime we had anytime we talked about building relationship with students, there's always the teachers that are like, "Yeah, but I have to teach content. I don't have
Yeah.
time
And they're
to
not
just."
wrong.
And they're not wrong. And so it is really about providing that space for those check-in, check-out. I know one year we practiced kind of a triaging questions with students, just getting a temperature of like how they are, what they're coming in the day with. I would always use like a little thing. It was an emoji sheet, and I said, "Can you
Cute.
circle this?" But I took this from a friend, but or from a colleague, but I can't claim it as my own. But I have them circle what is their emojis for the day, and I even turned it into like a Google form, so they just had to like submit
Yeah.
it and if they needed to tell me anything about the day. And I was like their homeroom teacher. And so, having them share a little bit about what they're coming in the day with was helpful for
Yeah.
me to, is there something I need to address to that? Does that kid need breakfast? Are
Yeah.
they really
Are the
excited? Like I
basic
had
needs met. Yeah.
having their basics needs met, but it also just helped me know if there's something I needed to connect with them about. And I hoped it would always provide them with the understanding that I'm someone that they can share that with. And I'd
Yeah.
often have students I had one student, she'd come in and she was just exhausted because she spent the whole evening at cheerleading practice and didn't get her
Yeah.
homework done and like all these things. And she'd come in and kind of unload, but she didn't do that right away. It took time for her to understand, building those. So there's like ways to build that in for the secondary level, but it is kind of a struggle because
Yeah.
some teachers view that work as, you know, it's just another thing, but really like it's so embedded in your practice as a teacher. It should be so embedded in as your practice as a teacher, but
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. I love to see students kind of involved in their own relationship mapping. So, do they have peers that they would call friends? Do they have, someone that they can call on either in their classroom or in the building? Our adult perceptions may not always align with a student perception, so it is helpful to
yeah.
gauge, what they identify as
And
strong.
that's why I liked having like when we would do the survey about who is their trusted adult because
Yeah.
sometimes their perception of a relationship with adult is very different. You're like, they trust me. They have a funny way of
They know
showing
me.
that, those things. But it is really like and it was very clear about it. Also, is a good evaluation of like which teachers are really great at building
Yes,
relationships with student, and is there something they can help others with?
I love that.
Um, yeah.
And you really wanna celebrate those teachers, right? I think we can all picture them, the one who the students just gravitate to, leaning on
Mhm.
those teachers and staff members as experts in
Yeah.
relationship building, I
Yeah.
think is really great, celebrating that skill set.
Yeah. So, okay, one last question I really do wanna talk about is sort of like and we talked about this a little bit, about relationship mapping. You wanna just maybe tell me a little bit more about that with peers and even community members or their families? What would that look like for students to do that work?
Yeah, sure. So really having the student identify the friends, someone that they would call a friend. I think that that's important. And then having the students again identify the adults that they feel connected to. And I love the idea of using other students as kind of a buddy. So we may have, a UPK or some very young learners in a building, and maybe they have a kindergarten buddy, right? So we're using this 5 or 6 year old expert at school and pairing them with, a little 3 or 4 year old in a UPK program, or I've seen it done where fifth graders serve as kind of a bus buddy for kindergartners. So they're going to pick the kid up at their kindergarten classroom, walk them to the bus, make sure they get on, make sure they get off the bus in the morning and to their classroom. So really kind of fostering those relationships within a building, using students as leaders. I think a leadership club is also a great opportunity to foster those kinds of peer connections and really promote a sense of belonging and connectedness in a
Yeah.
building. You also mentioned community members. what I'm picturing is, kind of expanding the fields on our relationship map. So we have, the list of students, and maybe included are extracurricular activities that student does, or any aspect, sports that they're on, anything that kind of exists in a student's life that could potentially be a supportive relationship. And then we as a school are better able to collaborate and strengthen the process of supporting students that we serve daily.
Yeah, and I think about with the community members is that many times, like I had students that they weren't involved in a lot of stuff at school, but they took ballet and they were really involved in like a ballet program, or
Yeah.
they're really involved in Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, or they're really involved in like a youth group. And so like they had connections that were just outside of the school. And so I love it when students were able to self-identify who their trusted adult is, and you realize, oh, they have this whole network of people
Yes.
outside of our school, and that's great. That's awesome. Like it's not that they have to have someone at school, but it's the idea of like, do they have someone? And so it's always good to like understand like how they're involved in the community in
Yeah.
different ways. And so yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, and what a great opportunity to bring the community into the school. That kiddo who has a great ballet network, maybe there's an opportunity for some sort of enrichment activity, or creative arts celebration,
Yeah.
and really just bridging any gaps between the school and community, and bringing as many trusted adults and helpful professionals
Yeah.
into the lives of our students.
Man, okay. We could talk about this for a long time. And I really do I really just wanted our listeners to kind of have an introduction to this, because you're right. This is the work that schools are doing. And so when we say relationship mapping, we're not saying here's a brand new thing that you probably don't know anything about. It's just another name for the things that the schools are doing that work. And even just like that encouragement of being, there are teachers that are building those relationships, and like, how
Yeah.
can you expand that within your school, and how can you strengthen the work that you're already doing? And so I think that was really the goal of what I wanted to accomplish in this conversation. I'm just so excited to continue hopefully talking about this in the future, and I'm just thankful for your time, Jackie,
Yes,
and
thank
just
you.
your experiences. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Larissa. Grateful for this opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.